Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into the 2026 World Cup. But, forget about the star players, the specific tactics, or the FIFA rankings for just a minute, because we're actually going to explore this fascinating, incredibly high-stakes chain reaction. We're going to see how a single, simple boardroom decision to expand the tournament has created these massive, hidden variables that are literally going to rewrite the physics of the competition. It's the ultimate butterfly effect, right? Where a tiny change on a piece of paper creates an absolute hurricane out there on the pitch. And honestly, it all starts with just one staggering number. 104. That one number changes absolutely everything. For decades, we've all been conditioned to watch a 64-match tournament. It's a rhythm we just know by heart. But in 2026, the schedule is exploding to an unprecedented 104 matches. It's a massive, almost overwhelming jump. And this sheer volume of games, well, it's not just about putting more football on TV. It changes the entire DNA of the event. It fundamentally alters how groups are structured, how the knockout math works, and honestly, how human bodies can even physically recover in time.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the 48-team expansion, then look at avoiding the collusion trap, the completely new knockout math, battling the elements, the logistical nightmare of travel and time zones, and finally, the rise of the dark horses.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the 48-team expansion, which is really the core catalyst for everything else.
Just look at the sheer magnitude of this structural shift. On the old side, you've got the elegant, traditional format we all grew up with, right? 32 teams, neatly divided into 8 groups of 4. It's perfectly symmetrical and leaves us with exactly 16 teams for the knockouts. Beautiful. But the new format, it's kind of sprawling chaos. 48 teams stretching out across 12 groups of 4. Now, this massive footprint obviously means more nations get to experience the joy of participating, which is fantastic for the global game. But mathematically speaking, it created a giant structural puzzle that organizers had to desperately try to solve behind the scenes.
Which brings us to Section 2, avoiding the collusion trap, or what was initially a very flawed solution.
See, when you expand to 48 teams, the math immediately gets incredibly tricky. Originally, FIFA actually proposed 16 groups of 3 teams to manage these extra countries, trying not to add too many games to the individual team schedules. But data scientists and academics just tore this idea apart. Why? Well, the problem with a 3-team group is the super high probability of collusion. Collusion is basically when the final match of the group features 2 teams who know exactly what result they need to advance. Like, if a mutually beneficial draw puts them both through, they have zero incentive to attack. It turns into that classic gentleman's agreement where they just pass the ball sideways for 90 minutes, totally risk-free. Meanwhile, the poor third team is just sitting helplessly on the sidelines, watching their tournament end without even touching the ball. For us fans, it completely ruins the viewing experience.
And on top of that, 3-team groups heavily increase the risk of what's called a dead rubber game. This is a match where, no matter what the score is, both teams are either already through or already going home. It completely drains that intense competitive tension that makes the World Cup so magical in the first place. I mean, nobody wants to pay thousands of dollars for tickets or wake up at 3 a.m. to watch what is essentially a meaningless training session masquerading as a competitive match. So this intense academic scrutiny, and let's be real, the very real fear of broadcasting boring, non-competitive games, ultimately forced organizers to panic and just revert back to traditional groups of 4.
Moving right along to Section 3, the new knockout math, which is the final format we ended up with. Okay, so keeping groups of 4 solved the collusion issue, but it meant creating a brand new mathematical headache. Let's walk through this new pathway to the trophy. Step 1. The top 2 teams from all 12 groups advance. Simple enough, right? But wait, that only gives us 24 teams, which just doesn't work for a symmetrical knockout bracket. So we get to Step 2. The 8 best third-place teams across all the groups also get to advance to fill out the bracket. Then Step 3. This kicks off a newly expanded round of 32. Now, what does this actually mean on the pitch? Well, for us watching at home, sweating over the group tables, surviving the group stage is no longer just about dominating your opponents. It's often going to be this chaotic, desperate scramble to just be the best of the rest. We're likely going to see teams advancing with just 3 or maybe 4 points, purely because they somehow managed to hold on to a slightly better goal difference than some other team in a completely different group.
And we really have to look at the harsh physical reality of this new math. For the first time in history, the ultimate champions are going to have to survive an unprecedented 8-match gauntlet. That is an entire extra 90 minutes of football, and hey, that could easily stretch to 120 brutal minutes with extra time and penalties, all against world-class opposition just to lift the trophy. It might not sound like a huge deal on paper, but remember, this is happening at the very end of an already physically draining club season. Asking players to run essentially a marathon and a half of extra elite-level football, it's going to break bodies down, no question.
Let's look at Section 4, Battling the Elements. This is really the invisible opponent of the tournament.
So, pivoting away from all the boardroom math, let's talk about the brutal physical reality of actually playing those 8 matches across the massive North American continent. Just look at these stark environmental contrasts. You've got Vancouver, right? Mild, incredibly comfortable, sitting around 18 degrees Celsius. But then a team packs up, flies a few hours, and suddenly lands in Houston. Boom, 33 degrees Celsius with a suffocating 75% average humidity. It is literally like trying to play intense professional football inside a sauna. That heavy humidity, it acts as an active, invisible rival on the pitch. It essentially stops a player's sweat from evaporating properly, which rapidly drives up their core body temperature and completely drains their stamina.
And then there's the infamous Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, sitting at a staggering 2,240 meters above sea level. Sports science shows us that at this extreme altitude, the thin air heavily reduces second-half sprint recovery. Imagine you're watching a highly favored sea-level European team. Normally, they rely on a high-intensity 90-minute pressing system, right? Well, by the 60th minute, you're going to see players with their hands on their knees, visually struggling to breathe as severe oxygen debt sets in. Their high-press tactics are just going to completely fail. And adapting to these environments is going to be incredibly difficult, mostly because teams simply won't have the standard pre-tournament preparation time to acclimatize their bodies.
This leads us perfectly into Section 5, Travel and Time Zones, an absolute logistical nightmare. Compounding all of those extreme shifting climates is the travel itself. Because the tournament spans 3 massive countries, teams are going to be crossing thousands of kilometers between matches, and travel is incredibly dangerous in elite sports. We often think of jet lag as just, needing an extra cup of coffee or feeling a bit groggy the next morning. But biologically, it's much deeper. Jet lag actively disrupts the body's circadian rhythms. At the absolute highest level of football, where a goalkeeper's dive or a striker's perfectly timed run is calculated in literal milliseconds, delayed neurological response times can be fatal. A tiny, microscopic fraction of a second drop in cognitive sharpness that easily turns a brilliant heroic save into a devastating goal conceded.
The stakes here are captured perfectly in this quote from our source material. Endurance in 2026 may be less about fitness and more about how well teams manage the spaces between matches. I really want you to think about that. It won't just be about those 90 minutes on the grass. The quiet, accumulating fatigue of long cross-country flights, constantly changing time zones, packing up hotels, and drastically shifting climates, all of that might completely neutralize the technical and tactical advantages of traditional powerhouse nations. At the end of the day, pure talent just won't be enough if the legs are entirely gone.
And finally, Section 6, Rise of the Dark Horses, the perfect storm. When you combine an 8-match schedule, third-place qualification chaos, brutal shifting climates, and exhausting travel, you create the absolute perfect storm. This chaotic butterfly effect creates massive opportunities for underdogs to shock the world. Teams with specific unique traits are essentially built to survive this exact gauntlet. Let's look at just a few examples. You've got Morocco, with their elite defensive structure that can absorb pressure and deeply conserve energy. Japan, heavily utilizing devastating speed in transitions to just catch tired teams completely napping. The USA, heavily leveraging home soil familiarity and a youthful, highly energetic core. Senegal, bringing a sheer physical intensity that can overpower fatigued opponents. And Colombia, boasting this balanced adaptability that's perfectly suited to radically different playing conditions. These aren't just participants, guys. They are squads uniquely engineered to thrive in a grueling, unpredictable format where the traditional, highly technical giants are extremely likely to falter. We started this journey by looking at a simple boardroom decision to expand a tournament, right? And we've seen how that single choice ripples out into complex qualification math, brutal weather challenges, and absolutely grueling logistical travel schedules. It completely changes the very nature of what it takes to win. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. When the variables are this wild, the travel is this taxing, and the margins are this incredibly thin, who will survive the ultimate test of endurance to become the 2026 champion? The traditional powerhouses are definitely no longer safe, and honestly, that makes this tournament incredibly exciting to look forward to. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you found this hidden chain reaction as fascinating as I did.